Please welcome the President and Chief Executive Officer of the Detroit Regional Chamber, Sandy Baruah.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Awesome. Thank you all for being here. Particular thanks. Yasmin, thank you so much for those great opening remarks. I see a lot of green in the audience today. We got a lot of citizens, employees, and senior leadership here, although some of that might be MSU. As I say that, I'm thinking that. But thank you to Yasmin and to the senior leadership team for Citizens for their 8th year of support for this. I also want to recognize my bosses that are in the room, the board members of the Detroit Regional Chamber, which there are many today. I'm not going to mention you all, but I do want to recognize our board chair, Matt Elliott, from another financial institution, Bank of America. But Matt, thank you so much for your leadership and all your great work. And while I'm doing thank yous, I want to mention two people on the Chamber team in particular, Kristen Lucas and Ostea Uptate. They make up our incredible research team. So I'm basically up here over the next several minutes taking credit for their work. So a round of applause, please, for Ostasia and Kristen. And for those of you who've been coming to this event for a while, and again, this is our 10th year, I do want to note that this is my favorite event. Now, I know some of you know we host another event. It's on an island, and I love that event too. But this event is all about data. It's all about research and data. And the reason why this is my favorite event is because there is so much out there in society today that is opinion or disinformation. We really like that we at the Detroit Regional Chamber strive every day to put facts and data and research out in the world so our business leaders, our political leaders, and our civic leaders have a trusted source of data and research. Now, none of this would be possible without our sponsors. And of course, we have Citizens. Again, thank you. A special thanks to Blue Cross Blue Shield of Michigan, which has been a 50-year partner of the Detroit Regional Chamber. The Michigan Economic Development Corporation, which we and the MEDC do so much work together. Want to welcome some of our returning sponsors, Enbridge and the Farbman Group. And by the way, you're going to walk away with a gift at the end of today's presentation, thanks to the Farbman Group. And I want to welcome some of our new sponsors. I mentioned green, so the Michigan State University is one of our new sponsors this year, along with Meta and Verizon. So a quick round of applause for all of our sponsors. And as always, you know, what is said in this room, we don't want to have stay in this room. So please, you know, bring out your social media machines, start them up, get them warmed up. Share your thoughts in terms of what you see, what you hear, you know, perspectives and data that is shared with you. Please use the hashtag SOR24 and tag the Detroit Regional Chamber at Detroit Chamber. Now, of course, after I do a little data download, I'm going to do my very best Chuck Todd imitation here. I am really pleased that we're going to have this incredible panel, and I think last year everyone loved the panel, and I'm so glad to welcome back Anna Paulson, my friend from the Federal Reserve Bank of Chicago. Thank you for making the trek from Chicago to be with us again today. We have two Detroit Regional Chamber Executive Committee members on our panel today, the CEO of Bridgewater Interiors, Ron Hall, and the CEO of Kelly, Peter Quigley. Thank you guys for being here and being part of this. All moderated by the incomparable Devin Skillion from Local 4 and the host of Flashpoint. So I mentioned the role that the Chamber plays in the region and in the state regarding data and research. And in addition to the report that is in front of you today that we're going to highlight, the State of the Region report, we're also very proud to have two other signature reports. One is the State of Education and Talent, which, and you'd never guess it by its name, is focused on education and talent, and how we are progressing, or frankly not, in terms of reaching our educational attainment goals, and what employers are looking for in terms of a work-ready workforce. And the other one is through our Mish-Auto unit, led by Glenn Stevens, who's back there in the corner. The statewide Michigan is Automobility Report, which I think is also in its 10th year, which really focuses on Michigan as the global epicenter for mobility and all of the data attached to our role in leading the automotive world. And in addition to that, we have 2 polling partners that we work with. We work with the Gallup organization, specifically the Center on Black Voices at Gallup, to do polling in the city of Detroit and just the Tri-County area, really focused on the lived experience of Black Americans in our region. We launched that report at the Mackinac Policy Conference in 2023, and we're getting ready to do another poll with the Gallup Center on Black Voices that we intend to launch at the 2025 Mackinac Policy Conference. And then, of course, we have our long-term partner for statewide polling in Michigan with the Glenn Gariff Group. And what you're going to see today is a combination of data that we get from multiple sources, but also data that we get from our own work with Gallup and the Glenn Gariff Group. And for those of you who don't know this, we also have an interactive data research site, oddly called DetroitDataCenter.org, where you can, as a business leader, as a media person, as a civic leader, can go create your customized report on, either for a geographic area or certain industries, certain demographics. You can kind of create your own adventure, if you will, on data, and that is completely available to everyone. And if you're interested in these other reports that we have, they are scattered around the room, and if you can't find one, just raise your hand and one of our team members will get you a copy. So I want to frame the data download section in these 3 areas. First of all, I have been talking, the Chamber's been talking for quite some time now about this economic perception disconnect. And that is, what do voters feel about either their own economic situation, the economic situation of others, and how the difference, the disconnect between how they feel about how they're doing versus how they feel the economy is doing. The second theme, we've obviously had a group conversation about Michigan's population, largely spurred by the Governor's Council, the Grow Michigan Together Council, which I was proud to serve on, and how population growth, or Michigan's lack thereof it, plays a role in our prosperity. And then finally, I want to end on some notes about electrification and kind of what that means for Michigan. So let's start with the economic perception disconnect. So this is going to be about where we are using hard data. And I also want to note and be very, very transparent that past performance is no guarantee of future performance. Your mileage may vary. So just a lot of the data that we're about to show is rear view mirror data. But at least it shows where we have been using data. So gross domestic product is perhaps the greatest, most obvious metric that everyone from economists to the guy on the street use to gauge our economic performance. Well, nationally, as of Q3 of 2023, in other words, just day before yesterday, our nation was growing at just about 5% on an annualized basis. 5% growth, that's incredible. And over the last year, Q3 2022 to Q3 2023, the nation grew at a solid 3%. These are solid, good numbers. Now, Michigan lagged a little bit. Through that same period of time where the nation was growing at 3%, we were growing at just shy of 2%. Not exactly where we want to be, but it still shows solid economic growth at both the state and the national level. Unemployment is perhaps maybe an even more important indicator of economic health because, what the old line is, right? A recession is when your neighbor loses your job, a depression is when you lose your job. Well, fortunately, over the last few years, not many people have been in that boat, except for at the very start of the pandemic. If you look at where unemployment was at either the national or the regional or frankly the state level right before the pandemic, it was right under 4%. And today, at both the national and regional level, it's just about at 4%. So essentially, statistically, we're almost exactly in the same very strong unemployment situation as we were right before the pandemic. Now, when I was faking my way through econ classes in undergrad, they told me at the time, and again, this is obviously a while ago when we were inventing electricity in the wheel and things like that, they said 5% was essentially full employment. Well, we've been way below 5% for a long period of time, even predating the data on this slide. So I'm not sure that 5% that my econ professors were talking to us about way back then still holds. Now, voters do have a connection between their own situation and the actual labor market. So when you look at what Michiganders are saying, again, this is statewide data, 75% of Michigan voters report not finding any trouble finding a good paying job. That's a hugely strong number. 2/3 of respondents say that the job market is lush. There is not a problem finding a good paying job in my area. And most importantly, 80% of Michiganders say I am not concerned about losing my job. Now, these, for Michigan, are incredibly strong numbers. And if you also want to use the metric that we often use, which compares the number of job openings available across the state to the number of unemployed people across the state, we're exactly where we were right before the pandemic. In other words, there are 1.5 jobs available right now for every unemployed person in the state of Michigan. Another piece of good news is wage growth. Now, we all know for a generation or more, especially for lower income and middle income earners, wage growth has been, unfortunately, stagnant. Today, again, at this moment, remember the disclaimer, your mileage may vary, at this moment, wage growth is not only significantly higher than it was prior to the pandemic, when everyone said that the economy was doing well, it's actually higher than the rate of inflation. Now, dropping inflation rates and rising wage rates may be two ships that pass in the night, and this dynamic may not last very long, but at this moment in time, we do have good news to report. Another piece of really interesting news, at least for the chamber team, was this number here, labor force participation. In the entire time that I've been in Michigan, we have had this dynamic where Michigan has lagged the nation when it comes to labor force participation. We just don't have as high a percentage of our work-eligible citizens in the labor market as the nation as a whole. Right now, we're essentially tied with the nation. And you can see how the orange and blue converge at the very end, where there's this only 0.3% gap between the national level and the Michigan level. And this is a new dynamic that we're seeing, and we're going to be very interested to see if this is a trajectory that we continue on, if it levels out, or if it reverts back to its historical norm. Now, for us who own homes, good news for us. In Q2 of 2023, the Detroit region, again, this is a regional number, not just the city, the region grew at 6.4% in terms of home sale prices. That's compared to 3.6% at the national level. Our home prices in the Detroit region actually outstripped the home price gains in the Miami region. And that's something that's never happened before. So good news for homeowners. And this is another number that we talk a lot about, and we've been highlighting this number for the last 3 years. New business applications. which translates into new business starts. After the Great Recession of 2008 and 2009, we did not see a spike in new business applications and new business starts. And this was highly unusual because traditionally, coming out of a recession, people lose their jobs, and what do? They start their own enterprises. That drives innovation, that drives business growth. So even though there's a recession, there's a positive outswing coming out of that. We did not see this in 2008 and 2009, which is one of the primary reasons why we had such sluggish growth coming out of the Great Recession. At the start of the pandemic, we saw an explosion in new business applications, and that is still happening. In fact, this last year, 2023, we recorded Michigan's second strongest year for new business applications. And when I look at all of this data, the one piece of data that I'm actually most excited about as someone who runs a business organization and cares deeply about the regional economic health, this is the number that gets me the most excited. So I promised the disconnect piece, and here's a piece of that. So you poll Michigan voters across the state, 61%, I'm doing as well, if not better, than I was prior to the pandemic. And as I said earlier, 80% not concerned about losing their job. But almost 70% of those exact same respondents say the economy is weakening. 45%, almost half, say that inflation will be worse next year. Now, mind you, all evidence to the contrary, but this is a great example of where people say, I'm doing fine, the rest of you are screwed. Now, we know why that is the case, right? You walk into a Meijer, you walk into a Kroger, anyone who's shopped for anything over the last 2 years knows that this run-up in prices that we've had isn't going away. I mean, eggs, 63% change since the pandemic. Beer, and even worse, bourbon is up 25%. The team wouldn't let me put that on the slide. I don't know where the priorities are. But, we are seeing this high prices as being a real driver for people's negative perceptions of the economy. Here's another great example. Consumer spending versus consumer sentiment, right? So the bottom line, the blue line, tracks consumer sentiment. This is the University of Michigan, the famous University of Michigan number. This number obviously took a huge dive at the beginning of the pandemic, and frankly, it just never really recovered. It just is kind of bumping along a little bit. It's up just a little bit right now, but I don't know how long that's going to last. But look at the delta between consumer sentiment and consumer spending, which is the orange line up top. Now, I know what you're thinking. Well, of course consumer spending is up. Inflation is up. Things cost more. This slide is inflation adjusted. So the rising costs of eggs and bourbon is not factored into this slide. People are spending more because they're buying more, not just because inflation is driving things up. So even though people have a really sour view in terms of their consumer sentiment, by the way, the numbers that we see today are actually worse than they were during the Great Recession of over a dozen years ago. That gives you an idea of how sour consumers are, but they're still spending. And again, I want to really congratulate my friends at the Fed across the country. We have never seen inflation drop as much in 1 year than we've had in this last year. And that is really thanks to the great work of the Federal Reserve Bank Board of Governors and the Federal Reserve banks across the country. We peaked at 9%, and we are at 3% today. Now, not quite the Fed's 2% goal, but 3% is a far cry from what it was just a short time ago at 9%. Business leaders, CEOs in particular, are quite optimistic. 73%, again, this is a national number, are projecting revenue increases. 73% are projecting revenue increases, 63% are projecting profit increases, and 44%, just shy of half, are projecting hiring increases. Also, and what's not in the report is just very recently a review of national economists also had a very positive view. Now, if we were to rewind the tape and give you this exact same data from US CEOs and top economists across the country, it was a much sourer outlook. In fact, they were predicting a recession in 2023 that clearly didn't happen. Now, for 2024, they're predicting a great level of confidence. Small business leaders, not quite as enthusiastic, but still kind of share the dynamics, perhaps not surprisingly, of consumers. 64% of small business owners say that their businesses are in good health, but only 25% of them think that the economy is in good health. It's an interesting conundrum. So I said I would spend a little bit of time talking about population. Now, when the Governor's Population Council was report, and I was asked to comment on it, I came up with this conclusion. Our house is on fire. And our house has been on fire now for 40 or 50 years. Devin, you used the analogy on your show, I think just last weekend, about the boiled frog, right? Well, our frog is cooked. Our frog is very, very well done, and this is not going to get fixed overnight. Michigan is 49th in population growth of the 50 states. Let's face it, I'm not good at math, but that's not good math. Between the year 2000 and 2020, the average growth in the United States was 18%. Michigan managed over that same period of time a whopping 1%. We're 37th in median household income. We're 35th in educational attainment rates. And despite our little increase in labor force participation, we're still in the bottom third of that. The Detroit region in particular plays an outsized role in driving Michigan's population or lack of. The Detroit region is roughly 60% of our state's population, and of the top 20 regions across the country, here's where we rank. When it comes to population growth of young people, we're 14th out of 20. In educational attainment, we're 19th out of 20. In household median income growth, we're 15th out of 20th. The one bright spot, though, is home ownership rates for young people. We're actually at the top of that 20-peer region list. So a little bit of a bright spot. And continuing the homeowner discussion, we actually outstrip the nation in home ownership rates. Now, there's probably a lot of reasons for that. One, we have a more aged population. Michigan not only is not growing, we're also getting older. So we've had more time for people to own a home. And of course, our housing costs are much more reasonable than many parts of the country, even though they continue to be a challenge. But we also want to highlight on this slide, because you can't not mention it, is the disparity in racial attainment around housing. For white people, it is 80%, and for black people, it is 46%. And if you want to add in mortgage rejection rates, for white people it's 11%, and for blacks it's exactly double that at 22%. So these kinds of ongoing disparities also make it a challenge that we have to address. Now, I don't know if this is good news or bad news. We have improved our rating on infrastructure according to the American Society of Civil Engineers. We're at a C-, guys. And by the way, this is an improvement because we were at a D+. So I'm not sure how excited we are as parents when our kid comes running in the front door and say, "Hey, great news, Ma, I got a C-." So this is improvement. I want to recognize that, but obviously our infrastructure has a long, long way to go. But one of our bright spots in infrastructure is DTW Airport. Constantly rated as one of the best airports in the country. So I wanted to not, end this on such a negative note. But another thing that's interesting, and this is included in the report, that voters are now really understanding the incredible infrastructure challenge that we have in Michigan. When we asked Michigan voters, would you rather invest, public monies in education infrastructure, or would you rather have a tax cut? 60% said, no, do the investment thing. Now, let's take that with a grain of salt, because once people get into a voting booth and are voting their checkbook, right, sometimes behavior is different. But this was a really interesting finding for us in our statewide voter poll information, that people are really responding to and understanding the challenge that we have. So, finally, I wanted to talk a bit about electrification. Now, there's been a lot of conversation about the transition from ICE engines to electric power. And some want to say that the move to electrification of vehicles alone will save the planet. And then there's others that say that no, the move to electrification, that'll cost jobs. That'll cost jobs. We should just stick with our gas-powered vehicles. Well, in the Chamber's opinion and in Machado's opinion, neither side has this right. So first, let's look at what this means kind of economically in terms of investment for the future. Michigan, as we all know, is the auto state, right? And we also know that every nation on the planet that has two coconuts to rub together is dying for some piece of the automotive supply chain. It is one of the most valuable industries, if not the most valuable industry on the planet. But look where we are when it comes to EV investment. If we're the auto state, we're losing to the peach state, for God's sakes, right? We are losing to Georgia in terms of the investment going into electrification for vehicles. And so this is, while some are trying to make this a political issue, this is a real economic issue. This is about the future of Michigan's business and, more importantly, Michigan's workers. Now, nobody wants to see me bust a move, but let's bust a myth right now, right here, right? If you read the headlines in the newspaper, what do you say? What do they say about EV sales? EV sales are dying, right? Not true. EV sales are growing. They're just growing slower than they were in the previous 2 years. If you count in plug-in hybrids along with full battery electrics, roughly 1 in 9 new cars are an electric vehicle. And when you look at just the progress that has been made in terms of market share, let's just go back to early 2000, right before the pandemic. What were your EV choices then? Well, you had a few Teslas, right? The Model Y wasn't out yet, which is the best-selling, not only is best-selling electric, but one of the best-selling cars on the planet. You had the Chevy Bolt, which, by the way, I have and I love. You had the very expensive and avant-garde Jaguar I-Pace. You had an equally expensive Audi e-tron. You had some quirky things like, remember the BMW i3? Kind of looked like a clown car that had gone bad. These were your choices for electric vehicles in early 2020. Now, fast forward today, we have more than 60 choices, and we're now at least 1 in 9 new. So when you look at what the trajectory of growth is of electric vehicles, do we want to make this a political issue, or is this a business issue? And if we're going to understand and be part of the future of the automotive and mobility industry, should we be leaders or laggers, right? So when we talk about EVs, let's understand that EVs aren't for everybody, right? John Dutton is not going to charge his Ram pickup, on the Dutton Ranch. And certainly, based on what the technology is today, if if you live in an apartment, if you only have one car, if you drive long distances, if you're constantly towing your horse trailer across country, right? You know, a Chevy Bolt's probably not the right answer for you, right? But what other product can we think of that started out as, you know, really expensive, really clunky, with limited range? Thank you, cell phones, right? Technology changes at an incredibly rapid rate. So what the infrastructure is today, what the product is today, is not going to be the product tomorrow. But even assuming the product doesn't change, let's just pretend for a minute, what is the market for EVs today? So let's take away the affordability issue. Let's not worry about the $20,000 or $30,000 car market. Who can do EVs right now and do it really easily? One, upper middle class and above earners, single family house with a garage with the ability to charge at home, and multiple cars. So you have one ICE car and one EV car. Think of the market just today with today's infrastructure and today's product offerings that makes that incredibly possible. So think of the lush market that is here today if this were a business issue, if this were a product issue, as opposed to a political issue. And lastly, let's talk about the importance of international competition. We can pretend that, oh, EVs are bad. You know, we'll just stick to our ICE engine. The rest of the world does not have that memo. The car up here is a Chinese vehicle. It's about $35,000. And where is Kristen? There you go, thank you. You know, we were just talking about, she just drove, what was it, the BYD Seagull, which was what, $13,000? $11,500, right? You know, about the size of a, you know, Chevy Trax, Honda Fit, something like that. These companies are now building in Mexico. And what does that open them up to? USMCA, or NAFTA 2.0, whatever you want to call it. So if these products are coming, should we pretend that they don't exist, or should we prepare to go to battle with them? So as I wrap up, I want everyone to think about two important things as we welcome our panel led by Devin Skillion. First of all, let's think of things as economic issues and not political issues. And if we think about it as economic issues, will we choose to rise to the challenge of next generation mobility or not? Because if we won't do it, who will? Secondly, think of the cultural piece, what we sometimes call the public civility piece. Will elected leaders and us as citizens, will we allow the use of fact-based discussion? Or are we going to be tribalistic, which we do so much of today? If this side of the aisle says this, then this side of the aisle has to say no. If this side of the aisle is wrong, then we're always right. And we know that's not how America or Michigan in Detroit has succeeded over generations. So we have an economic issue and we have a cultural issue, and if we don't solve these issues, we're not going to solve any of the other ones. Thanks so much.